Hello, and welcome back to Resilient Walk. If you found your way here today, perhaps you're feeling something many of us know all too well, that peculiar ache of being surrounded by people, yet feeling profoundly alone. That sense of drifting through days where connections feel shallow, where conversations skim the surface, and where, even in our hyper-connected world, we somehow feel more isolated than ever. Before we begin our journey together, if you find even a moment of peace in these next few minutes, I invite you to like this video and join our quiet community by subscribing. And please, share with us in the comments, what's one small connection, however brief, that brought you comfort this week? A smile from a stranger? A text from an old friend? The way sunlight felt on your face? Now, settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let's travel together to a small mountain village, where an old weaver is about to discover something that will change not just her work, but her entire understanding of what it means to be human. High in the mountains, where morning mist clings to ancient stone houses, lived an elderly weaver named Amara. Her cottage sat at the village's edge, filled with looms of different sizes and baskets overflowing with threads in every color imaginable. Deep forest greens, sunset oranges, the soft blue of a robin's egg. For 60 years, Amara had woven cloth that warmed families through harsh winters, that swaddled newborn babies, that draped over tables during celebrations. Her fingers knew the rhythm of the loom as intimately as her heartbeat. The shuttle would glide through the warped threads, creating that gentle thok-thok sound that had become the soundtrack of her life. But lately, something had changed. Amara would sit at her loom each morning, her weathered hands moving with practiced precision, yet feeling disconnected. The threads she pulled seemed individual, separate. Each strand existed on its own, and though they came together to form cloth, they felt like strangers forced into proximity rather than partners in creation. She began to notice this feeling everywhere. At the market, people hurried past each other, eyes downcast, lost in their own worlds. Conversations felt transactional, exchanges of necessity rather than connection. Even in her own work, what once felt like magic now felt mechanical. "I'm just pulling threads through threads," she whispered to herself one particularly grey morning, her voice barely audible over the rain tapping against her windows. Nothing more. The cloth she created was still beautiful, still functional, still sought after by villagers. But something essential was missing: the joy, the sense of purpose, the feeling that her work was part of something larger than herself. The crisis came on a morning when the mountain mist was thicker than usual, wrapping around her cottage like a soft blanket that somehow felt suffocating. Amara sat at her largest loom, working on a tapestry commissioned for the village elder's granddaughter's wedding. The pattern was intricate, interwoven roses and vines that would take weeks to complete. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind wandered to dark places. What's the point? The thought arrived unbidden. These threads don't know each other. They're just stuck together. Like everything else. She thought of her neighbors, each locked away in their own struggles. Old Henrik, who'd lost his wife last spring and barely spoke to anyone now. Young Senna, who worked 3 jobs to support her sick mother and had no time for friendships. The baker, who smiled at customers all day but went home to an empty house every night. We are all just threads, she realized, lying parallel to each other but never truly touching. The shuttle slipped from her fingers. She tried to catch it, but her reflexes weren't what they once were. It clattered to the floor, and as she bent to retrieve it, something happened that had never happened before in 6 decades of weaving. The tension in the loom suddenly released. Not dramatically, there was no loud snap or violent unraveling. Instead, it was as if the threads simply gave up. They loosened, sagged, and lost their structure. Hours of work began to slowly undo itself. Amara sat back in her chair, looking at the half-finished tapestry as it quietly fell apart, thread by thread. And for the first time in years, she began to cry. Not from frustration, but from a deep recognition of something she'd been trying to ignore. "This is how I feel inside," she thought. "Like I'm coming undone, and no one can see it happening." Amara might have sat there all day, watching her work unravel, if not for a soft knock at her door. She wiped her eyes and opened it to find Senna, the young woman who worked 3 jobs. But Senna looked different today. Not rushed, not stressed, but somehow luminous. "Amara," Senna said, her voice gentle. "I was walking to work, and I had the strangest feeling I should stop by. Are you all right?" Something in the young woman's tone, not pity, but genuine care, cracked something open in Amara's chest. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think I'm losing my way." Senna stepped inside, looking at the unraveled loom without shock or sympathy, just understanding. May I tell you something I noticed yesterday? Amara nodded. I was rushing to my job at the bakery, stressed about being late, when I saw old Henrik sitting on his porch. He looked so sad, and usually I just wave and hurry past. But something made me stop. I asked if he'd like some company for a few minutes. Senna sat down near the loom, her fingers unconsciously tracing one of the loose threads. We talked about his wife, about baking. She used to make these incredible honey cakes. And then Henrik said something that's been with me ever since. She looked up at Amara. He said, "You know, Senna, I spent so many years thinking love was about holding tight to someone. But I'm learning it's more like being part of a pattern. Even when you can't see the whole design, even when some threads seem to go in different directions, there's still a connection. The pattern continues, even when individual threads break." Amara felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening in a room she'd forgotten existed. I realized, Senna continued, that I've been seeing my life as this isolated struggle. Working alone, caring for my mother alone, dealing with everything alone. But yesterday, sitting with Henrik, I felt it, this invisible thread connecting us. Not just him and me, but all of us. The baker who always saves me the day-old bread so I can afford it. My mother, who taught me her songs even when she was too weak to sing them herself. You, who wove the blanket that's kept us warm through 3 winters. Amara walked over to her loom and gently picked up one of the loose threads. In the soft light filtering through her window, she could see something she'd never noticed before. The thread wasn't just a single fiber, it was made up of hundreds of tiny filaments, twisted together so perfectly they appeared to be one. "We think we are separate," Amara whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. "But we are not, are we?" Senna smiled. "Even when we can't see it, even when we feel most alone, there are these invisible threads connecting us. Your kindness ripples out to touch people you'll never know. My care for my mother somehow strengthens Henrik's memories of his wife. His wisdom helps the baker feel less alone. It's all woven together." Amara held the thread up to the light, watching it catch and shimmer. "I've been looking at individual threads," she said slowly, "instead of seeing the fabric they create together." Over the next hour, as they carefully retensioned the loom together, Amara began to see her work and her life with new eyes. Each thread was indeed individual, unique, with its own color and texture. But the strength came from their connection to each other. The beauty emerged not from any single thread, but from how they supported and complemented one another. "You know what's remarkable?" Amara said, running her fingers along the rewoven section. "The threads that were broken, when we rewove them back into the pattern, that section became stronger. Not weaker, stronger." In the weeks that followed, Amara's cottage became a different kind of place. She still wove her beautiful fabrics, but now she understood what she was really doing. Each morning, as she sat at her loom, she would think of the invisible threads connecting her to everyone who would eventually wrap themselves in her work. The thread from a sheep that grazed on the hillsides, tended by young shepherds who sang to their flocks. The dye from berries picked by children who laughed as their fingers turned purple. The loom built by a carpenter whose grandfather had taught him to love the grain of wood. But more than that, she began to see the invisible threads that connected every person in her village. Threads of kindness, of shared struggle, of quiet support that happened in moments too small to notice but too important to dismiss. Henrik started stopping by in the afternoons. At first, he came to watch her work, finding the rhythm of the loom soothing. But gradually, he began to share stories of his wife, and Amara realized these stories were themselves threads, connecting past to present, love to memory, one heart to another. Senna would visit after her last job, sometimes bringing her mother, who would sit quietly, humming old songs that somehow perfectly matched the rhythm of Amara's weaving. These melodies became part of the fabric too, invisible threads of beauty woven into the practical warmth of wool and cotton. Word spread, as word does in small villages, about the weaver who'd rediscovered her joy. People began to visit not just to commission cloth, but to feel the peace that had settled over her cottage like morning mist, soft, pervasive, healing. But the real transformation wasn't in Amara's work or even in her cottage. It was in how she moved through the world. Now when she walked to the market, she noticed the invisible threads everywhere. The way the baker's eyes lit up when Henrik complimented his bread, creating a thread of pride and recognition. The way Senna's mother hummed softly while choosing vegetables, and how that humming made other shoppers smile without quite knowing why. The way a child's laughter rippled through the square, loosening tight shoulders and softening worried faces. These weren't grand gestures or dramatic connections. They were the quiet, persistent ways that human beings naturally reach toward each other, creating a web of support so subtle we often forget it's there. One morning, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, a young woman from a neighboring village arrived at Amara's cottage. She was clearly struggling, her eyes holding that familiar look of isolation and disconnection. "I heard about your weaving," the young woman said hesitantly. "I wondered if you might teach me." Amara smiled, remembering her own moment of unraveling, her own discovery of the threads that had always been there. "Of course, dear one. But first, let me tell you what I've learned about what we are really doing when we weave." And so Amara learned that her greatest work wasn't the cloth she wove, but her understanding of the connections that weave us all together. Perhaps our own lives are like that cottage in the mountains, filled with invisible threads that connect us to every person we encounter, every act of kindness we witness, every moment of beauty that takes our breath away. These threads aren't always visible. They don't announce themselves with fanfare, but they're there, in the way a stranger's smile lifts your spirits, in how your struggles make you more compassionate toward others, in the ripple effects of every choice you make. When we feel most alone, most unraveled, most like our individual thread is too small to matter, we can remember this. You're not just a single thread trying to hold yourself together. You are part of a vast, beautiful tapestry, woven from countless moments of connection, care, and shared humanity. The thread that connects you to the person who needs your kindness tomorrow. The thread that links your current struggle to the strength you'll offer someone else. The thread that joins your story to every other story of resilience, hope, and quiet courage. These threads are always there. We just have to remember to look for them. May you find the golden threads woven throughout your own story. May you trust in the connections that exist even when you can't see them. And may you remember that sometimes, the strongest part of the fabric is where it was once broken and then rewoven with care. Thank you for walking with me today. If this story brought you a moment of peace, I'd love to hear about a time you felt unexpectedly connected to someone, even a stranger. Share it in the comments below. These small recognitions of our invisible threads help weave us all a little closer together. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and rest in the knowing that you are never truly alone.